talk in my last video about my book has made me want to read another chapter. Chapter 9, Song of Mornius. This one is actually, I haven't really been rewriting it, and so I don't know what to say. I'm hoping it's acceptable the way it is. This is another chapter featuring Avalar the Giant, which is one of my very favorite characters. If you hear a strange throbbing, rumbling, vibrating noise in the background, I don't know if you can pick up, if the camera will pick it up. It's not me having stomach issues. It's my neighbor. He's got a drill gun over there, and he's obviously drilling things into the walls. So, unfortunate timing for me to want to read my chapter while this is going on, but what do, you know? So, without further ado, Chapter 9, Song of Mornius. The city of Teardon possessed an alabaster beauty that snatched at her sight, stung her eyes like lightning on snow. Avalar groaned. Her heart raced as she entered the curved shadow of the great walls, the overlapping domes suspended high above the buildings. Wings of crystal loomed over her head. Joined at the tips and wrought of crystal and marble, they formed an arch beneath the wide blue sky. She smiled despite herself. The city stopped her breath, making her pulse throb in her neck. Almost she could ignore the tumult she created as she walked beneath the arch, the people crowding in close to confirm her reality. Yet her heart quivered with fear. With sweaty fingers she clenched, then released the hilt of her great sword. The humans pressed near, gaping upward at her face. Avalar mimicked them, goggling back with her mouth wide open. Her response drew a laugh. She focused on its source, on a young human with eyes that sparkled like the sun on a faceted sea. His eyes. Dough soft and brown, they tugged at her heart, shattered her defenses. She stumbled back. Dumbfounded, she shook her head and dropped to one knee. She stared at him, marveling at the glow of his spirit on his face. His soul transfixed her like starlight. "Who are you?" she whispered. He swept her a bow and grinned. "Cameron Florin," he said. His voice was soft, a match for the quiet strength of his stare. "Museum curator. Did the elves call you for service?" She studied his face, his flawless skin with its downy hint of beard. Small freckles dotted the bridge of his nose, fanned out across his cheeks. Like all the cold-weather humans, he wore his ruddy hair long and tied back in a tail. "I called myself," she told him. "I seek the Master Swords Academy. Do you know of it?" "Of course." Cameron smiled, the lines of his face shifting easily. She could not imagine his features doing anything else. To her it seemed this was his natural expression, what his face was made for. She cleared her throat as the crowd dispersed. Most were scholars, eager to rush from one curiosity to the next. The few who lingered were the ones who ran the city. She had come expecting trouble, a confrontation. Never did she imagine to find an ally so soon. Cameron reached to clasp her fingers. "Care for an escort?" Avalar stared in befuddlement at his hand. "Have you known giants before?" She forced herself to meet his eyes, the bright glimmer of his spirit. A knot formed in her throat. She curled her fingers, wrapping them carefully around his knuckles. "I see no fear in you." "I've always wanted to meet a giant," Cameron said. He shook his head. "Your people's magic hold the world together." "And you?" Avalar snatched a shaky breath. "I begin to see why our warder Sephram values humans so much, and why he risks our world for you." Cameron laughed. "Oh?" He glanced at the tensed faces in the crowd, the other humans who managed Teardon. "Well, I don't. We had our world and it died. Why were we brought here at all?" Avalar released his hand and stood. "Mayhap," she mused. Your race had not yet reached its full potential. She shrugged at his puzzled expression. Hear me. I have questions as well to ponder and answers I hope to learn. Perhaps you could teach me ere I go. You are unlike any human I have met. You are... It's my eyes, Cameron said. Star eyes, my brother Tarek calls them. I've white flecks around my pupils. They made the girls crazy for me when I was young. Avalar smiled, liking him. So you say, she murmured. They are unique, yes, but they are not your magic. I am a giant, Cameron Florin. I am deeply familiar with such things. Your magic comes from within you. It shines through your eyes, not from them. He snorted. I've no magic, but you giants are its living heart. We're as opposite there as we can be. She touched his forehead with her thumb, brushing wisps of red hair from his eyes. Everything has magic of some kind, Avalar whispered. Everything. Yours is foreign, that is all. She shifted her packs, wincing as the straps abraded her raw shoulders. He saw her expression and hurried to her side. I can carry something, lady. Avalar, she provided him. Releasing 2 of her 3 pouches of dried frozen meat, she lowered them into his arms. Avalar Mistivir, daughter of Grovelin Mistivir, protector of the North, Cameron finished. He swayed on his feet, struggling to balance his heavy frozen load. She caught his arm. With a flex of her hand, she compelled his gaze upward. You have heard of him? He nodded. I'll tell you on the way. Come. Turning, Cameron cleared a path through the shifting crowd. Avalar followed behind closely, her right elbow jutting skyward as she reached to adjust her pack. I know the names of many giants, said Cameron. He raised his voice above those of the children trotting beside her. Certainly all the adults. Working in the museum has taught me much of Talankai history. Grevlin was a slave, was he not? Avalar nodded. Her gaze lifted from the little girl below her hip to the tiered domes above her. Woven from marble and thin crystal strands, they stretched above the buildings and streets, protecting the city from heavy snow. Most of the surviving slaves still live, she told him, even now after 400 cycles. There are not enough of us for the magic to allow our deaths, so instead we are preserved. We never see old age. As Avalar ducked around a bright red awning, again she caused a stir. With a piercing cry, a wire-haired dog shot off down the icy street. She watched the tiny black creature, then stared beyond it. What is that? Avalar nodded to the building dominating the square. At first her gaze had been drawn by the court's central statue, a large white raptor with wings spread wide, its gildstone talons curled around the disk of a sun. Cameron followed her stare. The museum, he said with a shrug, my place of employment. They circled the statue, Avalar watching as the children, with a chorus of yells, raced to climb shelves of stone beside the great bird. Viewing rocks. Cameron smiled at her silent question, and that, he nodded to the raptor, honors the builder of this place. He was an elf with wings, they say, unique to this world and not from it. He was young when he built this city, yet still very powerful. So it seems. Avalar smiled to herself. Cameron stopped and gestured to the museum. The structure crouched behind a fleet of steps, its lofty white pillars holding high its triangular roof. Do you want to see? There are fabulous treasures within, all the cultures of Thalas combined, both human and elf. She nodded. I would like that very much. Again she shifted her pack, wriggling her shoulders to adjust the weight. Mayhap once I am settled? Turning, she devoured with her eyes the immaculate city, a place very few giants, if any, had seen. If I am settled, the elves might not approve of my presence here. Nonsense. He reached to clasp her wrist. They'll welcome you. You're a giant. How could they do less? Avalar nodded as she studied the museum's walls, the intricate weave of raw granite and the harvested gildstone the mountain elves were famous for. They could force me back home. Cameron released her wrist and scrambled up the flat boulders, stopping at her level. His intense eyes probed hers. I'll never understand why the elves consider us a threat to your people. Humans warp the old magic if they touch it, but why would we when it hurts us? Look around. Do you see any magic users? No. Rock-a-hare in the fields have more magic than we do. Her mood darkened as she studied him. Slowly, deliberately, she shrugged off her pack, arranging her thoughts as she strove to rest her shoulders. You are young, she told him, as I am. Bethink you. She shot him a glare. Some of your kind did touch our magic, and with it they imprisoned us. By calling your race powerless, you demean my people. Cameron leaned forward, his soft eyes suddenly fierce. But is it fair that our people should have to live separated from each other now because of wrongs committed by criminals long ago? Think of what we could learn from each other, Giant. Your kind are more ancient than the elves. Avalar cleared her throat. Forgotten was Teardon, its beauty and majesty. Even the winged statue honoring Pony blurred from sight, its symbol of triumph replaced by his eyes, the bright stars behind his gaze. She shook her head, remembering her own reaction to the humans in Faranth. It was her father's memories which plagued her. 400 cycles had passed, yet the worst of his scars remained, flailed deep into Grevelin's soul. Cameron's brown eyes softened as he smiled. I've hurt you, he said, and I'm sorry. But tell me this, why are your people kept hidden from us? What are the elves afraid of? If I were older, I would never... Avalar scowled at the stone beneath her aching feet. The flat granite remained clear, untouched by winter snow. Cameron sat back with his elbows on his knees, his chin cradled in his hands. You'd never what? She snatched her gaze to his face. Tell anyone. No adult would. It is a weakness we have, a defect, some say. It captures two spirits and makes them dependent on each other. If one perishes, the other dies too. Fortunately, she continued, this thing is rare and happens most often between giants. Yet my father bonded with an elf. I have beheld his pain whenever that elf and he are parted. It tears at his heart. I have... Avalar! Cameron touched her hand. He had been trying to get her attention, to stop her. She focused on his face and his furrowed brow. I already know about friend bonding, he said. There's no need for you to explain, not when it hurts you so much. She stared at him. Then you do understand. He blinked. I do? A heart cannot be fettered. She drove her gaze into his, willing him to hear her. Nor controlled. It simply does as it pleases. If a giant's heart were to bond in this way with a human, that giant would die ere he reached his prime. Do you not see my point? No giant can die while we are so few. The magic needs us. Cameron cocked his head in disbelief. Is that what the elves fear? The downfall of magic? Yes! Avalar kicked the base of the boulder with her heel. She craned her neck to gaze at the winged statue. Then she shook her head. This world would not endure it. Talankai is ancient, Cameron Florin. Without magic, it would already be dust. He sprang from the rock and landed with a heavy thud on the frozen stone. Then he straightened, thrust back his shoulders and turned. It's wrong that giants are the ones restricted. This is your world. If anyone should have to live isolated, we should. Avalar found herself grinning. But humans breed like squeakers, Cameron. Every farm I have passed has hordes of your little ones. No, she laughed. Your people would not fare well on Hoth. Cameron bent to retrieve the pouches he had leaned against the stone. I have heard tell of those children, he snapped. They were left when their parents were taken. Left behind, foodless and at the mercy of winter. Humans enslave humans now, Giant. She followed his lead and hefted her pack, grunting as it thumped her spine. Already he was striding across the square, his angry back rigid beneath his heavy load. Avalar blinked at his departure. How alike we are, she thought, humans and giants. Mayhap this is what the elves fear. Wait, she called. With hurried steps she trailed him. People within the square stopped still to watch, but she ignored them. There was only Cameron before her, Cameron with his red hair fluttering in the wind as he hastened away. Cameron, I am sorry. Cameron, wait. Breathing hard, he pulled to a stop. I've seen them, he whispered. His back was turned, his shoulders bunched forward, dead from starvation in the hay of rotting barns. I've buried them, giant, little children whose parents were taken. Babies who never had a chance. Who would do such a thing? Avalar moved around to see his face, his tight, clenched features. Humans enslaving humans? Enslave, he gritted, is hardly the word. The captives are mutilated, changed into Malian's creatures. They're forced to destroy what they love for the sake of what they hate. Avalar raised his chin with her fingers, forcing his angry gaze to her own. It is well that I am here, Cameron Florin. When it comes to battle, I know naught of the finer art, the dance of blade against blade. Your master sword elves will teach me, and once I have learned, I will free those parents who were taken, if any at all endure. She tightened her grip, drowning herself in the brilliance of his stare. I will strike a blow for those children. Like my ancestors, I will defend this world. He swallowed and nodded as they passed the proud museum. People huddled in groups on the white stone steps, their conversations stopping at her approach. She gave them a quick smile and bowed. Cameron glanced aside at her. I'm glad to see you relaxing, Avalar. You seemed scared when you entered our city. She slowed to keep pace with him. So I was. Avalar cocked her head, pretending to study the sky as she cast about at the many humans. Word of her arrival was spreading. Men and women emerged from the buildings ahead. Most gathered someplace near, close enough to watch without it being obvious. They've never seen a giant before, Cameron said under his breath. Like me, many of them have wanted to, I think. He thrust out his arm, barring her way at waist level. See that? With his chin, he indicated an L-shaped structure tucked behind the museum. Its rough walls merged boulders with hardened red clay. Cameron chuckled at her expression. That's the arena, he said, the place where the Master Swords fight. Avalar studied the lumpy hall. Even the merfolk's crude ice homes were of better construction. Show me where they are, Cameron Florin. Let me prove my worth. Cameron chuckled at her side. Wait, he said softly. They come to you. She raised her brows, staring at him dubiously. He patted her arm. For the first time she noticed his jacket, a rare blue worm cloth laced down its front. Between the midnight suede, seashell buttons fastened the silky fabric at his throat and down his lean torso. Seeing her scrutiny, Cameron smiled and stepped back. With a huge grin, he spread his arms, then turned, displaying both his jacket and black leggings. Like it? He said. It's my uniform. Avalar chuckled. You have done this before. For the elves' inspection, yes. I am their employee after all. Cameron stepped close again. He stood still and unafraid as she fingered the slippery cloth. How long must I wait? She asked. She glanced over her shoulder at the square. Activity slowly resumed itself as the shock of her arrival wore off. Teardown's people were artists and scholars, humans deeply attuned to the deeper things in life. They knew how to appreciate differences in other people. She spotted a man with an easel near the great statue, his hooded eyes intent on her face. No doubt he seeks to record this for Teardown's museum, she mused and smiled at the thought. There! Cameron's voice was soft as he squeezed her wrist. Turning, she followed his gaze and stared. Two men approached. Without fear they strode forward, their jet-black cloaks shushing in time with their airy strides. The older flipped his cloak as he stopped before her, revealing the distinct black hilt and red tassels of his Talador sword. As light touched the weapon, Avalar fell to her knees. She drew her own blade and placed it at his feet. "Rashar Navarin," Cameron breathed. Avalar studied the man's hawk-like features. Black armor gleamed beneath his woolen cloak. The white sleeves of his jerkin caught the sunlight and reflected it around his face. Through its glowing he watched and scrutinized, his eyes blue steel beneath his black brows. "You are human," Avalar breathed. She focused on his short silver beard, the soft dark hair on his wrists beneath his ruffled sleeves. "Yet you dress like a master sword." Rashar's long mouth twitched. Eyes slitted, he regarded her coolly above the ridge of his nose. "You offer your sword, giant. Have you come to learn?" She nodded, ever watchful. Rashar Navarin was a human with strength. Though he did not drain her old magic, his presence, the power of his voice, drew it close. "I have," she said. "Where are the elves to teach me?" "They live outside the city in the forest below Mount Allianth. We are the last of their students in this city. They've chosen us to act in their stead while they tend to their heart's work, the trees of their forest." He hesitated, studying her. "Tell me why you have journeyed so far. What brings you from Hathra Island?" Avalar drew a quick breath. She met Cameron's steady gaze, caught the glint of humor in his eyes. Then she turned her attention to Rashar's companion, a sandy-haired youth who mimicked his mentor's stance and stern demeanor. "Know you of the giants?" she asked. "Have you seen my people fight?" All three humans shook their heads. Rashar cleared his throat, fingering his black glimmerstone hilt. "We know of Nightbringer, the magical sword that redeemed your people once. We've heard the old tales of your battles against the Sher Khan raiders, yet none of us have seen a giant. We've frankly doubted you exist." Avalar lifted her sword and stood. "Oh, we exist," she said. "Never doubt it. And we fight like this." She demonstrated, exaggerating her movements as she cut the air with a strong, level sweep. "Our weight follows each stroke. We drive the thrust hard with our backs and shoulders. This is power, not precision, and it works well against Sunder Khan. But I want more. I want the finesse of the Talador, the joining of mind and sword." She broke off and lowered her weapon, alarmed by the younger Master Sword's grimace of pain. Rashar, his gaze locked with hers, placed a hand on his companion's arm. "Please." She dropped again to her knees. "I intended no harm. I am here to bond with my weapon. Will you not teach me?" Rashar looked her over, eyes squinting against the sun. At her side, Cameron waited as if he held his breath, his gaze on everything but her face. Rashar glanced toward the L-shaped arena. "You can't train in there. The ceiling's too low. But we do have other places." Slowly he released his friend. "Ty here could get you started, assuming he—" Still trembling, Ty raised his head. He met Avalar's concern and smiled. "I already have, Master Navarin. Her heart lies open, though her magic makes reading it difficult. She speaks the truth, sir. She wants the sword's lore, nothing more." Brows raised, Avalar turned to meet Cameron's stare. "A soothsayer? But I thought humans had no real magic." Cameron ducked his head to cover his face, yet not enough to hide the lurk of his smile. Glaring, Avalar crossed her arms. "I am not amused, Cameron Florin. I have heard of new magic, of powers from beyond our world. It is a terrible threat. If this human—" "Relax, giant." Cameron hastily grabbed her wrist. "His magic comes from his mind, from within himself, as we discussed before. You are safe, believe me." Ty stepped close and looked up. Avalar stared into his eyes, into a gaze like brightest gildstone. "Come," he said softly. "There are rooms in this city especially made for giants, rooms that have never been used. Please allow me to guide you, and I will explain along the way the first stages of the Talador." Avalar glanced at Cameron as she sheathed her great sword. "Go," he said with a laugh. "Your dance awaits, my dear."